Hi, I'm Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Abstract Essay, where ideas take shape, thoughts find depth, and every conversation explores the art of thinking beyond the obvious. And today I have my special guest from former cop, former federal inmate, an author, and an insider on both sides of justice, none other than Mr. Jack Straw.
Daniel, I'm glad to be here with you today. This is something I look forward to. But yeah, I'm glad I get a chance to talk about the writing process on the book. And if I can tell a bit about me, I guess I'll start with.
Yes,
Uh,
please.
I'm born and raised in Iowa for the most part, right in the middle of the United States here, not far from the Mississippi River. Um, I entered law enforcement when I was very young, and I stayed there for a number of years. And then I left law enforcement, went into business, and then I got in some trouble with the feds by moving money I shouldn't have been moving around. It ended up in federal prison, where I did 10 years. And so I've been on both sides of the tracks, you might say. Um, kind of seen the world from a different perspective than most people will. And it helped me learn how to write. I don't recommend that trip to prison to learn how to write, but it gave me the time to learn how to write. And I'm back in Iowa now. I get out of prison in 2019, and I've continued to write. I'm in the middle of another book right now, but that's kind of a short synopsis of my background.
And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world, Mr. Jack. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And today let's talk about the writing process of your book. So every book has a moment of misconception. Excuse me.
That's right.
Every book has a moment of consumption. What was the specific spark, an observation, a personal struggle, or a question you could not let go of that made you say, I have to write this book?
Well, the first book, which is False Confessions, which is my most popular one to date, I was actually writing a different book at that time, um, and I was in prison at that time, and so I'm writing the book with pencil and crappy paper and stuff. And I met another inmate whose name was Doug Williams, and Doug wanted to write a book, but he was an interesting character. And he started telling me his story. I kind of suddenly shifted gears. He had been in law enforcement in Oklahoma City, but more importantly, he'd been a polygraph operator, a lie detector operator, and I was familiar with the lie detector, and we used it when I was a cop, and it's I think it's fake. It doesn't work. You can beat the polygraph, but people don't know that. Anyway, Doug, um, who at one time had been a polygraph operator, became a crusader against the polygraph because so many people has their lives have been ruined by the lie detector. And he said he tried to write the book, he couldn't. So he came to me with that idea. I thought, well, I would think about it. And once I started talking to him about his life, he actually was at the White House. He worked for President Johnson and he worked for President Nixon. He was older than I was, obviously. And we started talking about the world of the polygraph and how many people we both knew whose lives had been totally ruined because they had confessed to something because the polygraph said they were guilty and they weren't because the polygraph was wrong. And that drove me to write that book. Right there, I decided this was much more important than the other book I was writing, which was a political comedy. Um, but so we sat down and we worked on that book, and it took quite a while to put it together because you had to do a lot of fact checking. But it was a worthwhile endeavor. Doug has since passed away. He died during COVID after he got out of prison. But just the fact he was such an interesting character in that kind of life, and it was something that was very important. A lot of people will never face having to take a polygraph. But the ones that do, and a lot of our federal employees do, a lot of private employees do, once they've sat down and taken that lie detector test, they realize what a horrible experience it is, and how they feel intimidated and bullied by the polygraph operator. That's what drove me to write it. It wasn't exactly an epiphany, but it ingrained it into my brain that it had to be done.
Mr. Jack, tell us beyond a central topic, what was the one core message or emotional takeaway you knew you had to deliver to your readers above all else?
Well, I think the one thing was that the authenticity, they have to look at this and to not take everything that the government tells you is real as real. And this is long before we were involved in all the things we are now politically, where there's everyone knows what's going on. There's it's hard to tell what's real, what isn't real. Uh, the polygraph came about back in the 1920s and 1930s and been used for a long time. But the message, the pure message was don't just take what they give you and say, this is how it is. Don't argue about it. Don't defend yourself. This is what we're going to do. And you have to follow along and follow our rules. And I think that was the message. Look before you leap and make your own decision and don't be bullied.
How do you test your initial book idea to see if it had weight and substance to sustain the entire manuscript? Did you use a particular framework or discuss it with a certain people?
There really wasn't a framework to it, simply because this is the first time I'd ever taken this on. Um, I interviewed a number of people. I and now when I started writing it in prison, it's difficult to do that. Obviously, you can't really do a lot there. I did as much research as I could from there. When I got out, excuse me, and I finished the book, I had much more opportunity to talk to a lot of people on both sides of the polygraph. Those that advocate its reliability and those that say it's pseudoscience. Uh, and so I did my research and I tried to stay as objective as you can, even though I had my own experience with it and I knew that it was BS, it was fake, it was just a weapon. But I did try to stay objective as long as I could. Um, but the research it got pretty heavy. It could have gone on further. We could have kept continued to research and research and research and get more opinions and but it seemed kind of foolish at a certain point because you had the yeses and the nos and there was really no one in the middle. So there's a certain point where you just kind of say, okay, it's time to put the pen to the paper, and that's what I did.
The blank page can be intimidating. Walk us through your very first tangible step after deciding to write the book. What is an outline, a mind map, or rough draft of a single chapter?
Well, this is my intention originally. I was writing a fiction book, so my ideas from that were kind of simple in a way because it's kind of just things are spewing from your brain to put that together. So the outlines there are really expandable. This is much more finite. So in the chapter, I had to get. Uh, I wanted to start out early developing Doug's character, and the book actually opens later in Doug's life when he's testifying before the U.S. Congress. And I thought I would start there to grab people's attention that this is real, this really happened, this is how serious it got. So the original outline was I was going to take them to that point that we would reach again later in the book. And so they knew that we were going to be climbing a big hill. And the outlines after the original chapter were much more chronological. I went back in his life and told the story of him joining the Air Force, and then we'd go through that segment and then how he was picked to work in the White House and what happened while he was in the White House, which is a very interesting part of the book that has not that much to do with the polygraph, but the outlines of those chapters detailed his relationship with President Johnson during the Vietnam War, and then President Nixon, and then when he decided to leave. And it told the story of his life while he was there, and how he was you're under a microscope, and he couldn't have a social life or anything, because that's just how it is when you work inside the White House. So that gave people a perspective of his life before the polygraph, and then after that we got into him leaving there and going back to his home state, and getting involved in law enforcement. And so the outlines originally we had to make boom get your attention, and then we went back chronologically.
The blank page can be intimidating. Walk us through your very first tangible step after deciding to write the book. Was Is it an outline, a mind map, or rough draft of a single chapter?
Was it a mind or a map? I didn't quite understand that.
Yes, it's a mind map. It's an outline or a rough draft of a single chapter. When the first time you want to write a book.
Oh, it's a very rough draft the first time. For me, I handwrite everything. I don't type. Uh, the problem that my penmanship terrible. I hand wrote the entire book. Each chapter I would handwrite, and I'd go back and kind of edit it, and I'd go to the next chapter. So uh, it was very rough, and I would go back with markers and take things out. By the time I would get down to sit down and typing anything I consider to be a um, close to a final draft, ready for editing draft, I guess I would call it. I've gone through it probably 8 or 10 times, the handwritten sections first.
Every writer has a unique rhythm. What did your typical writing day or look like? Were you disciplined? Write at 5 a.m. everyday person, or did you write in intense focus bursts?
Well, I had two different types of disciplines, I'll call them. The first one, while I was in prison, because there's not a lot else to do in prison but work out and write or read, I spent more time writing, and it was not an exact time. It could happen whenever time was available. Once I was out, I had to develop a time period to write, which was much more difficult, because there was a lot more things going on out here in the world than there is in prison. So I decided I would do my writing early in the morning, which I'm an early riser. So I would get up like at 3 in the morning, because that's where I would wake up. And by 3:30, I'd be sitting down, pen in hand, and going through it. And I would write. I would try to get uh, 5 handwritten pages to 10 handwritten pages before I take a break, and then I would take a little walk, and I'd come back and try and do a couple more. Um, and I would always get to a. Some people say they get to a spot where it's kind of dried up for them, and then they quit. Then I didn't. I actually got to a spot where it was really taken off pretty well again, and I would make a couple notes about it, and that's where I would quit at. So when the next day came, and I would come back in at about 3:30 after getting up at 3, brushing your teeth and having coffee, um, I would have a high point that was familiar to me to start at again, instead of trying to dig up the original idea for that chapter, if that makes sense.
Makes sense. Makes sense, Mr. Jack. And were there any surprising books on writing or books in a completely different genre that influenced your approach to structuring or writing your own?
What books influenced me to do that? Is that what you said?
Yes, please.
Actually, and I'm sure a million people. Someone gave me a copy of Stephen King on writing, and I want to say I'm not a big Stephen King fan. I'm not. That's not a genre I like, but that was a very good book, Stephen King on writing. I've read a lot of nonfiction books in my time, and if I and the only fiction writer that I still to this day like, he just passed away, was Cormac McCarthy, and I always liked his style. of writing. Um, so I guess there was influences. He would be one that I would look at. Um, I've read a ton of books. I think if you're going to be an author, you got to read a lot of books. That's my opinion. So I really can't give any other specific ones other than that.
Many authors describe killing their darlings, cutting scene, chapter, or character by love for the good of the book. Did you have to do this, and what was the experience like?
Could you say that again? Could you repeat that one? I had a little glitch here. Go ahead.
Yes, many authors describe killing their darlings,
Mhm.
cutting a scene, chapter, or character they love for the good of the book. Did you have to do this?
Yes. And that came during the editing process. And it's hard because I was always under the impression, in my mind, that when you're writing, it's best to write for an audience of one, for yourself, to something that you would read and hope that some like minds would read that. But there are sections of the book I had in that ultimately didn't fit. And I worked with an editor who said, yeah, it just doesn't, it's killing the flow. It's going to lead people off a different direction. And that's hard to do because a couple of them you work very hard. You really got them all smoothed out. And, uh, and I've kept those sections in a file and I've looked at them later and I thought, man, they would have fit, I think, but no, maybe not. So the short answer is yes, I had to do that. It wasn't really, there was a character who was taken completely out, uh, who's a real person, but whom I thought was very interesting. But it didn't. This person, she didn't add anything to the story, and ultimately was taken out. But it's kind of hard to do that. I know where they get that the saying "killing your darlings." It's kind of tough because you take it kind of personal after putting that amount of time into it.
Interesting, Mr. Jack. And can you tell us about chapter or section that underwent the most dramatic transformation from your first draft to the final published version? What prompted the rewrite?
Well, I can tell you exactly what that was. It was towards the end when I'm telling Doug's story in the book. Part of the story evolves, actually has to put me into a chapter to make it the story flow in the direction it needed to go. And it was very odd for me to inject myself into the story, though that's exactly how it happened. Um, and I think I went through, it was over 40 rewrites because I didn't want to come across as some kind of, I don't know, a bigger than life person, but then I didn't want to come across as some kind of an idiot. I knew there was something in the middle of the road there because I did play an important part in it, but you didn't want to overstate it. And so the rewrites happened again and again and again. And ultimately, the editor went back to the original writing of the book and said, that's the one. That's the one we'll use. And here I had done all these rewrites for nothing. Could have stayed with that one, but I didn't know that.
Writing a book is an emotional roller coaster, Mr. Jack. What was the highest high and the lowest low you experienced during the entire process?
Um, the highest high is when I think you get to a point where you feel like you're actually writing something that's worthwhile and it's moving along. For me, it was probably about halfway through the book, um, and I was in my second edit, and I thought, this is going to be okay. This is pretty good, and I think that was the high point. I gave me some confidence. The low point, I don't know exactly a low point, but the biggest challenge to it, the biggest or the low point, was when you get all your notes together and you get everything together and you got this story in your mind and everyone's gone and you sit down at your desk and you pick up that pen and you put the paper and you got to write your first word, and you realize it's going to take a long time, and you're not quite sure you're up to this because I was not prepared for this. Uh, that would have been, I guess, if that was a low point. The second low point would be, I think, when you're all done. And I think there's a sense of accomplishment. But when you write a book like this, where it's nonfiction, and you know the person, and the story is really amazing about him, um, and what he'd gone through, when it ends, it's kind of like you've been living that, and there's a transition from that writing to back to normal life to the maybe the next book you're going to write. There's a gap in there, so that was kind of a low point too.
Okay, that'd be awesome. And what will be your short-term and long-term goals, Mr. Jack, as an author?
What was that, sir?
What will be your short-term and long-term goals, Mr. Jack?
There's something clicking. I can't be a nice second. What?
What are your short-term and long-term goals
Oh, my short-term,
as
long-term
an author?
goals.
Yes.
Uh, well, right now I'm in the middle of another book right now, which actually is a story of law enforcement. When I was a cop, it's a true story as well. Um, I don't. I'm a part owner of a business, a beer business, and my friend. My long-term goals are to continue writing. I'm 67 years old, so it gives me that time freedom to write. Short-term goals. We have a YouTube channel that really is something I enjoy doing. We discuss politics. We discuss a number of things from an ex-prisoner's point of view, which makes it kind of unique. But continue writing. I want to finish this book hopefully by the first of the year, and then maybe take a little break and look around and see what I should be doing next.
Yes, and good luck for your goals, Mr. Jack. Good luck, good luck, good luck. And what would be your piece of advice for those people out there want to be like you, an author?
Well, I mean, the only advice I can give people, if you really want to do it, you sit down and do it. Everybody talks about it. Everybody says I always want to write a book. Well, not very bad if you don't do it. If you really want to write one, you can sit down and do it. You're not fighting against anyone. You're not battling the world. The only person doing battle with is yourself. If you call a truce with yourself and sit down and write it, and write something that you enjoy to read, if you can do that, I think you can accomplish it. That's the only hurdle. That's it. Is actually doing it.
Okay, and thank you for that advice, Mr. Jack. And can you please recommend a book or books that influence your journey?
Recommend it. Pardon me.
Can you please recommend a book or books that influence your journey?
Books that influence your writing.
Yes, please.
Uh, Anything by Cormac McCarthy. I think he's I and I say he just passed away. Anything like that gives people an idea of what the true art of writing is, I think. And then go back and look at some of the classics. Don't be afraid to read some of those, To Kill a Mockingbird and things like that, where uh, back in the days where I think now we're running into an issue where AI is becoming a tool people are using to market books. But go back and look at some of the older things that Mark Twain, um, any number of books that these guys sat down at an old table, or these ladies sat down in our bench and wrote, and with a regular pencil, not even a pen, and that should give you some inspiration just to know that's how they did it, and it's pretty magical what they did. A lot of them.
Interesting, Mr. Jack, and thank you for that recommended book. So, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 or Book 101 review in fifth season too. Comedy 101 in second season, and My Food 101 in fifth season as well. Geography 101 fourth season, and My Baby Podcast Law 101 and Mental Health 101. Love Letters in fourth season, and Movie 101 review and Music 101 in fourth season, and Science 101 and Sex 101 in its second season. Where please do listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Mr. Jack, having completed this monumental journey, what was has the process taught you about yourself that you didn't know before you began?
You can have discipline even if you don't think you can. And when you doubt yourself that you can actually finish the project and you see the book in your hand, you do have discipline. And I believe everyone has discipline. And this is how I discovered mine.
Indeed, Mr. Jackstraw. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support all your books?
Well, once again, Dan, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And I wish your listeners well. And you're a busy guy, it looks like. So keep the good work up.
Thank you, sir. So, where do people buy your books, Mr. Jack?
They can go to Amazon and get them there. They can also go to a site called fedjointsbeerjoints.com and get them there. That's where they are. And I hope they take a look. They get a chance. Let me know what they think.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Jack Straw because if you support him, for sure more and more empowering books like this to come. So, Mr. Jack, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me on, Daniel.
More to come, people. See you soon.